So we have been having a conversation. We've been talking a little bit about this guy named Nehemiah. And we have been dealing with this sermon series called A Builder's View. We have learned so much about the life of Nehemiah, and so we will continue on that trend of thought today. So Nehemiah will be our subject matter upon which we will build some truth and extrapolate some understanding. But I got to be clear to let you understand up front that today's message is a grown folks message. I'm speaking to grown people today. I'm speaking to people who have a purpose and know they have a purpose. You know, if your entire purpose in life as you see it is to keep up with the XFL stats, this message ain't for you. If you understand more about, how many points Jason Tatum averaging than you understand about your 401k, I ain't talking to you. This is not your sermon. But I've come to deal with some things this morning that I think are important for us to understand if we are going to successfully build the lives and walk out the purpose and the calling that God has for our life. Anybody in this room got a purpose? Okay, all right, I'm in the house. Anybody in this room know that God has something in the earth that they're supposed to accomplish before they close their eyes? All right, I'm in the building. Okay, and so we're going to be dealing this morning from the idea of a builder's paradigm. There is a paradigm that you have to have as an effective builder of your life within a kingdom context. It's a way that you have to think and contextualize the world that is different from other people. It's amazing to me that two people can look at the same situation, go through the same experience, and contextualize it differently. It's amazing to me, there's a story that's told about a man who was a wino and he raised two sons. And one of them grew up to be a billionaire, very successful. The other followed in his father's footsteps as a wino. And when they asked each of them how you accomplished your end, they both started with the same sentence: my father was a wino. They experienced and went through the same thing, but they saw it and contextualized it differently. And so as a child of God, you have to learn, if you're going to be an effective builder of anything from your career to your family to your life, you have to go through life, experience the same things as other people, but contextualize it differently. You have to be able to look at it through the lens of Christ, not the lens of your humanity. Because when you look at the things through the lens of your humanity, you miss out on points like all things work together for good for them who love the Lord, because then you start looking at trouble and saying, this is trouble. No, that ain't trouble. That's transportation. So what some people look at as trouble, you got to learn to look at as transport. God is using this to get me from here to there. If Joseph was here, he would tell you the pit was a good thing for me, because God used the pit for them to pick me up on my way to the palace. I told y'all I was going to the palace. But sometimes going where it is God has for you to go does not look like what it's supposed to look like as you see it. So we have to deal with that paradigm shift and shifting our mindset. So when we go through the same thing that other people go through, we got to see it differently. In 1997, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, and Apple Computer, launched a marketing campaign called Think Differently. The whole idea of the campaign was to put the world on notice that how we have contextualized and worked with computing and technology historically is about to shift. It's about to change. We're about to take this game and wreck it, disrupt it. That's the new term, disrupt the whole thing and shift it. But before Steve Jobs had that, there's a principle in the Bible that says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So this suggests to me that you'll never be able to rise above the level of your thought life. You'll never be able to rise above the level of your thought life. So if you're going to live out the purpose and plans that God has for your life, you're going to have to think like God. He tells us in Philippians chapter 4, verse number 8, it's not in your handout, but I'll say it in your hearing. He says this: whatsoever is true, whatsoever is noble, just, pure, lovely, of good report, of virtue, praiseworthy, think on these things. What does that mean to us? That means that there are other options that you could think about. There are other things that you could have on your mind. But God is saying, if you're going to allow me to transport you to where it is I have for you to go, it's going to be bumpy, it's going to be muddy, it's going to be some issues, it's going to be some problems. But throughout the process, think on these things. In other words, you ought to be able to find some joy in any and everything you go through. Every setback, you ought to learn to look at it as a setup. That God is setting you up to ultimately get you to where he said you could be. So Nehemiah is our character that we're dealing with this morning. And Nehemiah, I would refer to him as woke. So Nehemiah is woke. He understands that there is a problem. There's a problem that other people have feasted on and allowed to take place for well over 120 years. The walls around the temple have been destroyed. Everybody else has gotten comfortable walking around destroyed walls, but not Nehemiah. Nehemiah has heard that there is a problem, and he has decided, I have got to enter myself into this story to resolve this problem. What you have to understand is anything that you have a burden around, you are now plugged into purpose. Your burdens will always connect you to your purpose. But the issue is, here's a man who has a burden for a project, but he has no vantage point to get there. You look at the first two verses of chapter 1 and chapter 2, there's a 4-month gap in between when he has the vision, receives the information, and cognitively decides, I've got to enter myself into the story. There's a 4-month window before he's actually able and resourced to do it. So you got a man who has a burden to be a builder, but he has the job of a bartender. Have you ever experienced a situation where you had a burden to do something, but you weren't resourced to do it? You knew that there was more that God wanted to pull from your life, that he wanted to plug into you, that he wanted to get out of you, but you had no vantage point for it. Then you're in good company. That's exactly squarely where we find Nehemiah this morning. We find him with a job that don't nobody want. He has access to the king, and that's a beautiful thing, that he has access to the king. That will serve him well later. But in his present day situation, Nehemiah is simply a man who is tasked with drinking wine and drinking drink to make sure if it's going to kill anybody, it's going to kill him and not the king. Anybody want that job? We're taking applications after service. Anybody, no takers? Okay, nobody wants that job. So he found himself in a position that other people didn't necessarily want to find themselves in. And he has a burden to build. What do you do when you have a burden to build? You have a burden to do something that's above and beyond what you're currently in. What do you do when you're stuck in a job and you're stuck in a job and you know you got a purpose and a calling, but you're stuck in a job situation? So he finds himself stuck, and Nehemiah does the hardest thing in the world for anybody to do. He receives the vision from God and he sits on the vision. He waits. He positions himself. He spends the 4-month time frame preparing himself. And so this morning, there are 5 things that I want to deal with in the life of Nehemiah. And the first one I want to share with you is that vision always precedes timing. Vision always goes before timing. You will always see it before you're supposed to be it. It always precedes timing. But there are 2 things that effective builders do in their meantime. The meantime is represented in that time in between where you are and where it is God said you ought to be. The first thing that effective builders do when they understand that vision always precedes timing is they excel in their now while serving for their next. I just said something. They exceed in their now while they're serving for their next. Most and generally, when people ain't where they're supposed to be, they gripe, they murmur, they complain, they talk about how bad things are. They don't serve in a posture of waiting. They don't wait in a posture of serving. They find themselves mumbling and complaining. But what Nehemiah shows us is that we have to serve our way out. So they excel in their now while serving for their next. That means that they give purpose to time. So the space that's in between, the time that's in between where you are and where it is God said you could be, you got to give some purpose to that time. Time doesn't heal all wounds. What you do with the time determines whether or not a wound gets healed. Time does not position you to be successful in your life and to build the business or to build the career or to build the marriage or to build the family or to build the life that you desire to build. What you do with the time determines whether or not it will be built. And so the first thing an effective builder does in their meantime is they excel in their now while serving for their next. It's not in your handout, but I'll read it. It'll be on your screen. 1 Samuel 16:18, it's talking about David here. It says, then one of the servants answered and said, look, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. They knew something about who David was before he ever got to the throne room. What am I saying to you? I'm saying that while David had the unenviable task of walking behind animals and cleaning up their waste, he still found himself doing it in a spirit of excellence. My question to you, will you act in excellence where you are? Because the real deal is if you won't act in excellence where you are, you ought to shut up about where you want to go. Because if you will not act in excellence where you are, the Bible said this. The Bible says this. If you're faithful in little, he will bless you with much. But you got a department with a $200,000 budget and you can't half manage that. But you want more. And so we got to make sure that as we are asking for more, that we are positioning ourselves and acting responsibly and being a great steward of what he's already laid before us. David was anointed in verse number 13, but he doesn't ascend to the throne until 2 Samuel chapter 5. That's a 7-year gap in between being anointed king, had a ceremony. Prophet came out anointing him. King, he's king of the nation. He knows he's anointed to be king, and he went back to his regular job. You are anointed to walk out the purpose and plan God has for your life, but how are you doing on your regular work? Because it's through your regular work that God is going to give you transportation. He's going to give you transportation. The problem is we keep waiting for stuff to fall out the sky. God is going to use your present day circumstances to work the miracle that you're waiting on. But you got to position yourself. The second thing that they do is that they dig their wells before they're thirsty. They dig their wells before they're thirsty. I have a couple kids in college, and so I'm always talking to my kids about positioning themselves and preparing to take the next step. You can't wait till you graduate to start networking. You can't wait till you get your degree and say, oh, now I'm going to start calling some companies and going to some meetings some people. You got to start networking now. You got to start building it before you need it, because by the time you need it, it's too late. And so you got to learn how to build the well before you are thirsty. My youngest kid goes to school in Georgia and always have some type of, he's a theater major, so he's an artsy kid and he wants to be on stage and screen. And so he always has stage and screen people just hanging out at his campus for no good reason. You know, he'll text me. It's nothing for him to text me on a Tuesday and be like, Denzel was walking around. I just saw Denzel watching. Samuel Jackson was here. Spike Lee just walking around. And they will be holding ceremonies and whatnot. And I'm always asking him, are you going to these things? He said, no, I was playing some video game. I said, boy, as much as me and your mama done sacrificed for you to be there, if you don't get your hind part up and get over there with Denzel Washington, it's going to be a confusion. It's going to be a problem. Because you got to learn to build it before you need it. Side note for all the students and all the young adults who are transitioning and slipping out of your education and stepping into your life, you got a great thing right now called a student card. With your student card, anybody will be willing to help you. Anybody will be willing to give you an informational interview and visit with you and give you a vantage point of what success looks like for them and walk you through a path of how to get there. Please use your student card. Please use your student card. I yell at my kids about it all the time, so I figured I would yell at you too. Please use your student card. The second thing in your handout that an effective builder will always do, effective building requires a hybrid investment. Effective building requires a hybrid investment. It's going to take this and that. Kool-Aid requires not just water, but you're going to need that little packet too. And the water in the packet even won't be enough. You're going to need you some sugar as well. This is a hype. Do I got any Kool-Aid drinkers in the building? This is going to be a hybrid investment. It is going to be a hybrid investment to build your success. That word hybrid means a thing made by combining two different elements. It's a mixture. So Nehemiah 4:7 in the New Living Translation, it says this: but when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs of Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. Verse 8, they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Verse number 9, but we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet the threat. You got to do both. You have to pray and you have to post a guard. Now, here's the deal. Nehemiah is on God's assignment. He is doing God's work. It seems like to me that God would have sent some angels down from heaven to guard Nehemiah and his squad, but he didn't do it. He said, if you're going to be protected, if you're going to be safe, you are going to have some sweat equity in your deliverance. And so not only do you have to pray, not only do you have to exhibit faith, but baby, you got to work. You got to do some things on your own to work out your salvation. You got to do some things to work so that God can add some super to your natural, but you need your natural. So there's a hybrid mix. The Bible puts it this way: faith without works is dead being alone. And that's one of the reasons I love Nehemiah as a character, because I can relate to Nehemiah. For me, he's a pragmatic hero. He's somebody in the Bible that I can relate to and understand. There are many people in the Bible I can't relate to and understand, if I'm being honest. I can't relate to. God has never spoken to me through a burning bush. I didn't get it that way. Just like he didn't. God never gave me a staff and sent me out to the Mississippi and say, try this. It didn't work for me that way. So he never sent me bread physically out of heaven. I never saw it fall physically from the sky like they did in the Old Testament. It didn't work for me that way. But when I look at Nehemiah, I can see a man working in his ministry, on his mission, serving God, acting in faith, applying the principles of faith and works. And I see how God works through him in a pragmatic way. You and I have to work out this in a pragmatic way. You probably ain't heard from no bush either. You probably ain't been able to walk out to the river with a staff and put it in the water and it part on both sides for you either. But what you do have access to is the same thing that Nehemiah had access to, and that's the hybrid work of working in tandem with God to make sure that you get your breakthrough. The Bible says it like this: pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall angels put into my bosom. Y'all should have corrected me. That is not what the Bible said. The Bible said, pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall men put into my. In other words, you got to have some relationships on earth for God to funnel things to you from heaven. Side note, people help people that they know, like, and trust. If I don't know you, I don't like you, and I don't trust you, I ain't going to help you. clear the field. If I don't know you, I don't like you, and I don't trust you, I ain't going to help you. But people help people that they know, like, and trust. What does that mean? You have to build human connection and relationship in the world. You got to understand this is a hybrid breakthrough. This will be a hybrid experience. Number 3 in your handout says this: builders focus on the what, the why, and the who, but not the how and the when. Builders focus on the what, the why, and the who, but not the how and the when. Isaiah 55, verse number 8 in the Message Bible says it this way: I don't think the way you think. The way you work isn't the way I work. For as the sky soars high above the earth, so the way I work surpasses the way you work. And the way I think is beyond the way you think. God's mindset is so much higher than ours that when we get stuck in trying to figure out how he's going to do through us what he said he was going to do, we stay in a stuck place because a confused mind does absolutely nothing. And so what we have to do is get out of God's way. I wonder what your life could be like today if you got out of God's way. I wonder how much further along could you be if you put your focus on what God told you to do, the fact that God said do it, and you just started walking out what God said to do instead of trying to always figure out how it's going to happen. Can I tell somebody that anytime God gives you a vision, he gives provision? Can I tell you that anywhere God guides, he provides? You don't have to figure out the how. You have to be faithful to the what. And when you're faithful to the what, you're able to do things unnaturally that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. Can you prove it, preacher? Absolutely. There was a man named Peter who got allowed to walk on water. You tried. You tried. He allowed Peter to walk on water, and as long as Peter kept his gaze strictly on God, he had no issues. It wasn't until he started looking around at all the people saying, how in the world am I doing this? I wonder what they think about me while I'm out here. I wonder what they're saying about me. Man, I'm so afraid I could go down. I could hurt myself. I could be injured. I could die. As soon as he started thinking about all the how equations, he started to go down. But as long as he kept his gaze only on Jesus, he was able to move forward. If you're able to keep your gaze on Jesus, he will allow you to do things that are uncommon, unnatural, and that other people are not able to do who do not look at Jesus. So you got to understand, you cannot focus on the how. The how always impedes your progress and restricts your ability because God never intended for the how to be your focus. I was with my nephew a couple weeks ago, and we were playing around near a retaining wall, and I guess it went up to about 5 feet total, but it started lower, and so he would walk up the wall and then kind of jump in my arms, and I put him back on the wall, and then he would walk up the wall a little bit more and jump in my arms, and I put him back on the wall. So much so, we got him to about 5 feet. And so now it's a different equation because this is high. And he says, okay, Uncle James, you gonna get me? And I said, nope, I'm not gonna catch you, Jack. It's not gonna happen for you. I'm gonna let you fall and crash to the ground. And I said, no, boy, I'm going to catch you. Come on and jump. And so what he did was the same thing that you and I do. He looked around for a moment to assess the situation. And then as he was assessing the situation, he says, well, I'm up kind of high. And so you know how you get the shaky knees on your way down? He got the shaky knees on his way down. He started bending his knees and stretching out just a little bit. And I said, come on, man, I got you, Jack. Uncle James got you. I got you. And so eventually he jumped off into my arms. And instead of me just being able to put him right down this last time, he held on to my neck a little bit longer. He squeezed me just a little bit tighter. He squeezed me and he hugged me. And God said, he's squeezing you because now he understands that you got him. God has got you on a retaining wall. And all he's asking you to do is to jump and to trust that he's got you. Releasing your fear, you have to have more faith in God than you have fear in your environment. And trust that when you take a step, God will be there to catch you. The fourth point noted in your handout is this: builders always walk before they talk and investigate before they initiate. Nehemiah 2, verse number 13 says this: by night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down and its gates had been destroyed by fire. Verse number 16 goes on: the city officials did not know I had been out there or what I was doing, for I had yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. One of the last things you ought to do anytime you show up in a new environment is show up talking. The last thing you need to do when you show up in a new environment is to show up talking. You ought to show up measuring, understanding, getting clarity, getting context, not walking into something you don't understand, bringing your intellect to something you don't understand. That's the worst thing that you can do, is show up bringing your intellect where your ignorance is king. Because in a space where you are new and you don't have context, you have to measure it out. You have to walk it before you can talk about it, and you have to investigate it before you can initiate anything that matters. One of the things that I've noticed about people is they have an issue with this, and I'm one of those people with an issue with this. I'll tell on myself. So I don't necessarily listen very well. I don't listen well. In fact, I listen so poorly, I've actually taken classes on listening, like actual classes. Like where you go and sit down, there's a book, and there's a manual and paper, and you got to write down notes and study your notes about listening. Because part of my issue is I'm busy. I got a lot of stuff to do. So when I'm talking to somebody generally, I'm just listening to hear what your problem is so I can give you what I believe the best solution is and move on. I got stuff to do. And so I don't necessarily listen well. And because I have that barrier, I have to be very cognizant of that and slow down to hear people. Otherwise, I run the risk of offering prescriptions for which I have not diagnosed problems. And so I want to encourage you this morning to make sure that before you go into that next business meeting, before you go into that next conversation about telling other people how they supposed to live in their marriage, before you go into that other situation, how about you first do some investigation? Educate your ignorance before you start speaking out loud. The last thing, number 5 in your handout, says this: builders never build alone. Builders never build alone. Proverbs 13:20 says this: he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. My question for you this morning is, who are you building with? Who do you have on your team that you are building with? Who do you, watch this, this is a big one. Who do you submit yourself to? Who do you sit down? Who can influence your ideas and your judgment? Or are you the chief only architect of everything you do? Or is there anybody in your life that you have given license to say that's a bad idea and y'all still be friends? Or are you on the cancel generation where if you don't like everything I'm doing, if you don't support everything I'm doing, you ain't with me? Because you need a diversity of perspectives in your life to come to the best outcome. Bible says in a multitude of counsel there is safety. A multitude of counsel. And not just any random counsel, but you need some solid counsel. I got a guy that I meet with all the time. And every time I meet with him, I'm almost intimidated every time I meet with him. Because every time I meet with him, his number one question for me is, what are you working on big? What are you doing right now in your life that if God don't help you, it won't get done? You need people in your life to challenge you in that way and to push you in that way. And so I know Pookie took a bullet for you. I know Pookie got stabbed for you. I know Pookie gave you penny candy when y'all was growing up. I know you and Pookie tight. I know Pookie is your day one. I'm not saying you and Pookie can't hang out. I'm saying you got to put Pookie in another box. Because Pookie's company may not be the company that you need to get where it is God is trying to take you. Because where God is trying to take you, there are people that God have in the world you have not met yet. And because you're so focused on your day ones, you ain't letting nobody. It's a whole rap song out. I cannot think of the name of it that talks about the day ones. And that you have to maintain your day ones. And you're so focused on your day ones that you're not open up to new experiences, new opportunities. And God is going to use somebody you don't even know yet to catapult you to your purpose and your destiny. But you got to learn how to put people into buckets. I'm not saying you got to cut people off, but you got to learn how to put people into buckets. So when I want to hang with my day ones, I go play golf. Or I'll go, you want to go someplace and watch the game or something like that. That's the day one's activity. I don't call my day ones when I'm trying to buy a building. When I'm trying to make a $1.5 million deal, I don't call day ones. I call people who got the background and experience. Because the day ones can't help me with that. Nothing wrong with the day ones. Love your day ones. Put your day ones in the right box if you want to move your life at the right pace. There's a repeated phrase in chapter number 3 throughout Nehemiah that kept saying, next to them, next to them, next to them, next to them. Speaking about a sequential order of things, of how you had a symbiotic team of builders who shared his values, shared his passion, and shared his capacity to build. You got to get people on your team, people on your squad who share your values. Why are you running around as a married woman with a host of single women? Because y'all don't got the same values. Why are you, married man, hanging out with all the bros at the late night clubs and bars? Y'all don't have the same values. Or you shouldn't. I might have just talked myself into the problem. Maybe y'all do got the same values. But your values, you have to surround yourself with people who embrace your values, people who see the world as you see it, and people who can help you build and expand your mind, your territory, and get to the next level. So the question is, who are you building with? Because who you're building with will determine how far you're able to build and how far you're able to go. I'll say this and I'll prepare myself to close. About 3 years ago, I was looking to build a building. And I was working with some guys who had some expertise in building, and they had some capacity in building. And I made a mistake of going instead with the guys who had the expertise and the critical knowledge of working with people that I had known for a long time. That decision not only cost me the project, but it cost me influence and it cost me time because people were able to evaluate that was bad judgment. So I want to encourage you this morning that as you are moving about in your life, I don't care what you're building, and everybody is building something if you're building nothing more than your life, to be very thoughtful about how you're building and who you're allowing to build alongside you. Amen? Amen. Somebody give God a hand clap of praise for the word. Stand on your feet all over the room.